Assalamu alaikum. Podcast Brain and Eyeball, SAQ and Viva question and answer, part 2, 32 questions. Number 32. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei of the spatial visceral efferent, branchial efferent column. Answer 1. Motor nuclei of the trigeminal nerve, nucleus of facial nerve, nucleus ambiguous, composite nucleus of the 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves. 33. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei of the general visceral efferent column. Number 1. Westphal Edinger nucleus, superior and inferior salivary nucleus, lacrimatory nucleus, dorsal nucleus of the vagus. 34. Enumerate the descending tract in the spinal cord. Number 1. Anterior and lateral corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, olivospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract, stratospinal tract, reticulospinal tract. 35. Enumerate the ascending tract in the spinal cord. Number 1. Fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, lateral spinothalamic tract, anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract, spino-olivary tract, spinotactal tract, anterior spinothalamic tract. 36. Give the boundary of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle of the brain. Roof and lateral wall are formed by the tapetum, and medial wall shows the bulb of the posterior horn and calcar abyss. 37. Give the boundaries of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle of the brain. Roof. Medial part is formed by the tail of the caudate nucleus and stria terminalis. The lateral part is formed by the fiber of the tapetum. Floor, hippocampus, along with the alveus and fimbria and collateral eminence. 38. Enumerate the 7 functional nuclear components of the cranial nerve. Number 1. Somatic efferent. 2. Branchial efferent. 3. General visceral efferent. 4. General visceral efferent. 5. Spatial visceral efferent. 6. General somatic efferent. 7. Spatial somatic efferent. 39. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei of the somatic efferent column. Number 1. Oculomotor nucleus, trochlear nucleus, abducens nucleus, hypoglossal nucleus. 40. Enumerate different types of sulci of cerebrum, giving one example of each. Number 1. Limiting sulcus, central sulcus, axial sulcus, example postcalcarine sulcus, operculated sulcus, example Lunish sulcus, secondary sulcus, example lateral and parieto-occipital sulcus, complete sulcus, example collateral and precalcarine sulcus. 41. Where is the situation of mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve? What is its peculiarity? Answer. The mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve is situated in the central gray matter of the entire midbrain on each side of the cerebral aqueduct. It contains the cell body of the unipolar first sensory neuron for proprioceptive sensation conveyed by the fifth nerve. This is an exception to the general rule because here the first sensory neuron lies within the central nervous system instead of lying outside of it. 42. Thrombosis of which artery causes lateral medullary syndrome? Which part of the medulla oblongata is damaged? What are the characteristics of the lateral medullary syndrome? Wellenberg syndrome. Answer. Thrombosis of posterior inferior cerebellar artery causes lateral medullary syndrome. In this syndrome, posterolateral part of the medulla oblongata is damaged. Characteristics of lateral medullary syndrome: 1. Involvement of vestibular nuclei, severe greediness. 2. Involvement of the nucleus ambiguous, dysphasia, dysarthria. Involvement of the lateral spinothalamic tract, contralateral loss of sensation of the pain and temperature, involvement of the spinal nucleus and tract of the trigeminal nerve, which causes ipsilateral loss of pain and temperature sensation of the face. Number 5. Involvement of the sympathetic pathway, Horner syndrome. 43. Specify the commencement and termination of the tract in the posterior funiculus of the spinal cord. The tract in the posterior funiculus are fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. They are formed by the central processes of the neuron located in the dorsal nerve root ganglion. The tract of gracilis, which lies medially, is composed of fiber from sacral, lumbar, and lower thoracic ganglia. The tract of cuneatus, which lies laterally, consists of fiber from the upper thoracic and cervical ganglia. These fibers terminate by the synapsing with the neuron in the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, respectively, in the lower part of the medulla oblongata. Thrombosis of which artery causes medial medullary syndrome? Which part of the medulla oblongata is damaged? What are the characteristics of medial medullary syndrome? Answer. Thrombosis of the anterospinal artery causes medial medullary syndrome. In this syndrome, ventral and medial part of the medulla is damaged. Characteristics of the medial medullary syndrome: number 1, involvement of the corticospinal fiber, contralateral hemiplasia, damage to the hypoglossal nuclei, ipsilateral paralysis of the muscle of the tongue, involvement of the medial lemniscus, loss of sensation of fine touch, sense of movement, and sense of position. 45. Specify the origin and termination of the fiber of the optic nerve. Answer. Optic nerve is made up of axon of the ganglion cell of the retina. The fiber from the nasal half of each retina cross the midline in the optic chiasma and enter the optic tract of the opposite side, while the fiber from the temporal half of each retina pass posteriorly in the optic tract of the same side. Most of the fiber terminate in the lateral geniculate body, and few of the fibers pass to the pretractal nuclei and the superior colliculus. Name of the nuclei of the inferior olivary complex and mention their location. This is the question number 46. Answer is inferior olivary complex contain principal inferior olivary nucleus situated in the anterolateral part of the medulla oblongata, at the level of olive. Number 2, medial accessory olivary nucleus lies medial to the inferior olivary nucleus. Dorsal accessory olivary nucleus lies dorsal to the inferior olivary nucleus. 47. Enumerate the gyri present in the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. Superior occipital gyrus, inferior occipital gyrus, gyrus descendens, cuneus, parieto-occipital arcus, temporo-occipital arcus. 48. Enumerate the function of neuroglial cell. Number 1 function support, protection, participation in the neuronal activity, neuronal nutrition, defense process of the central nervous system. 49. Enumerate the nerves having pseudoganglia. Answer. Nerve 2 teres minor, posterior interosseous nerve. Medial nerve at the wrist, lateral terminal branch of deep peroneal nerve. 50. Enumerate structure in the visual pathway. Retina, optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, lateral geniculate body, optic radiation, visual cortex. 51. Enumerate the fiber present in the crus cerebri. Crus cerebri consists of descending fiber from the cerebral cortex. Its medial 1/6 is occupied by frontopontine fiber and lateral 1/6 by temporopontine, occipitopontine, and parietopontine. The intermediate 2/3 of the crus cerebri are occupied by corticospinal and corticonuclear fiber. 52. Specify the site of communication between the ventricular system and subarachnoid space. What is interventricular foramen? Ventricular system communicate with the subarachnoid space at 3 sites. In the lower part of the roof of the fourth ventricle, there is a median apparatus. I repeat, number 1 answer. In the lower part of the roof of the fourth ventricle, there is foramen of Mezendy, 2 lateral foramen of Luschka on each side of the fourth ventricle. Interventricular foramen of Monroe is the site of communication between lateral ventricles and third ventricle. 53. Enumerate the site where bipolar neurons are found: retina, cochlea, vestibular ganglion, olfactory mucosa. 54. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei present in the midbrain: oculomotor nucleus, Iringer-Westphal nucleus, trochlear nucleus, mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. 55. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei present in the pons: main sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve, nucleus of facial nerve, abducent nucleus, superior and inferior salivatory nucleus, lacrimatory nucleus. 56. Enumerate the cranial nerve nuclei present in the medulla oblongata: hypoglossal nucleus, nucleus ambiguus, nucleus of tractus solitarius, dorsal nucleus of vagus, spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, vestibular nucleus, dorsal and ventral cochlear nucleus. 57. Enumerate the gyri present on the tentorial surface of the cerebrum: parahippocampal gyrus, medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyrus, lingual gyrus. 58. Specify the boundary of the interpeduncular fossa. Mention the structure seen in this fossa. In the interpeduncular fossa is bounded in front by the optic chiasma, on the side by the right and left optic tract, posteriorly by the crus cerebri. The structures seen in the interpeduncular fossa are tuber cinereum, mammillary body, and posterior perforated substance. 59. Specify the ascending and descending fiber passing through the genu and the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Ascending fiber, superior thalamic radiation from ventral posterior nucleus of the thalamus to the postcentral gyrus. The thalamoparietal fiber, descending fiber, corticonuclear fiber, corticospinal fiber, frontopontal fiber, corticorubral fiber, corticoreticular fiber, and parietothalamic. 60. Name of the artery supply the internal capsule. Median and lateral straight branch of the medial cerebral artery, recurrent branch of the anterior cerebral artery, anterior choroidal artery, direct branch from the internal carotid and posterior communicating artery. 61. Give the anatomical difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Outflow tract, thoracic 1 to thoracic. Outflow tract, thoracic 1 to lumbar 2, and cranial nerve 3, 7, 9, and 10 cranial nerves, and sacral 2, 3, 4. Preganglionic fiber is short in sympathetic nervous system, but postganglionic fiber is long in sympathetic nervous system. Ganglia, paravertebral, prevertebral ganglia, or collateral ganglia. In parasympathetic nervous system, small ganglia close to the viscera, for example, otic ganglia cell in the plexus. 62. How are the cranial nerves and spinal nerves similar? How are they different? Cell body of the motor, spinal, and cranial nerves are located within the spinal cord and brainstem respectively, while cell body of the sensory nerves are located outside the central nervous system, and cell body of the sensory spinal nerves lies in the dorsal root ganglia, and cell body of the cranial nerves lies in the sensory ganglia associated with the nerve. This organization of cranial nerve is similar to that of the spinal nerve. Spinal nerve contain both sensory and motor fiber, but not all cranial nerve contain both motor and sensory fiber. 63. Draw and label transverse section of the spinal cord showing the main ascending and descending tract. There is a two section of the spinal cord. In the mid-cervical cross section, there is a two horn present, anterior horn and posterior horn, but in the mid-thoracic level, the cross section contain anterior horn, posterior horn, and lateral horn. And the white matter contain, in the posterior column contain fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, and in the lateral part contain dorsal spinocerebral tract, lateral spinothalamic tract, ventral spinocerebellar tract, spinotectal cells tract, and spino-olivary tract. In the ventral part, ventral spinothalamic tract, ventral corticospinal tract. 64. What is Fraze syndrome? Fraze syndrome is a complications following penetrating wound of the parotid gland. During process of healing, the postganglionic parasympathetic secretomotor fiber traveling in the auriculotemporal nerve grow out and join to the distal end of the great auricular nerve, which supply the sweat gland of the overlying facial skin. By this means, a stimulus intended for saliva production instead produce sweat secretion. So this is all about today's podcast. If you like this podcast, please share it and please subscribe my channel. Thank you for watching.